much, Shahzad, and thank you for the IABA for hosting this event. Anyone that knows me knows I'm incredibly passionate about spreading the news on sanctions, and I appreciate that you showed up at 10 a.m. on a Sunday. Personally, for me, it's never too early to talk about sanctions, but I do think 10 on Saturday is pushing it, so thank you. The main thing that I want to start off saying is that, and it's coming out more and more as more Iranian-Americans are engaging in basic transactions with family members or their own assets in Iran, is that we're seeing that these regulations, the main body of which was developed in 1995 and they've evolved into what we have today, they were developed as earlier panelists highlighted, as a comprehensive ban on any type of services, goods, investments, or anything that can be done with Iran. And it's contrary to what is often what we think would be intuitive, which is, well, sanctions are targeting a sanctioned country. Sanctions are going for the government. Sanctions aren't meant to impact the people. But when you have over 2 million Iranian-Americans residing in the United States looking to engage in basic transactions that are fundamental to the right of any immigrant, we now see hurdles and we see problems. And the reason is that this comprehensive ban prohibits, as Eric was pointing out, all these things that most of us wouldn't think should be prohibited conduct. If I'm an Iranian-American and I want to sell my house in Iran, how do I do that without having the ability to open up a bank account in Iran? How do I move my money from Iran to the United States if all financial ties with Iran are cut off and Iran is not allowed to participate in the banking system or any kind of direct banking with the United States? How am I supposed to travel to Iran to see my family if U.S. financial institutions are prohibited from exporting any type of financial services to anyone who's physically present in Iran? And these are questions that come up. Did you know that while you can receive a gift of a non-commercial personal remittance from a family member in Iran, you cannot receive a gift of property? This also includes trust instruments that fundamentally are used in the United States all the time, something like, which is known as the Sohla Umrah, where someone will give the property to someone. Title is turned over, but essentially absolute right into that property will not be given to that individual until the person who has given that right over passes. But in the eyes of the US government, that is a type of transfer of interest to a US person, and that creates a lot of problems because a lot of family members buy property in their kids' names who are living in the US and have no idea that this is even happening or that it's prohibited. Fast forward, that person wants to sell it, they've never paid anything to purchase that property, they've never done anything, and then I'm like, well, now you need to apply for a license, and you need to, in most cases, file voluntary self-disclosure. And as Eric highlighted, as Shaxon said, you need to wait 2 years for the government to give you it. Imagine if you applied for a license 2 years ago. What is your property worth now in Iran? And how is that benefiting our sanctions programs? Now, all of these things are starting to come to light, and more people are understanding that whenever they want to engage in activities with Iran, whether it's business or personal, they need to understand the laws. And that's why I'm very grateful for events like this with such esteemed panelists, because you're learning true good information, which is also a little issue that we have in our culture, I have to say. I don't know why people think that they know something that they don't know, and it's one of those things that you know. Why do you put yourself out there as an expert? I've used this example in other panelists. Like, I'll be at a party and someone doesn't know who I am, and they're like, my brother said no problem. That's just not the case. That's not true. That's not allowed. So it's really important to take the time to understand it. And when it comes to business, again, certain things that no one thought would be a problem. If you go to visit someone in Iran and you take your laptop and then you start doing work from Iran, that can be considered importation of services from Iran. That can create a problem. If you take your laptop with certain hardware information on that could trigger not just sanctions issues, but export issues, especially when you go to Iran. So it's just, there's a lot of restrictions that are there. While the government does provide some guidance in the form of frequently asked questions, you can always ask them for guidance if something is unclear. The other problem is that the regulations are fundamentally written in a way that is vague. I mean, we have had discussions multiple times. Like, I know I've talked to Eric and I'm like, well, I read it this way. It's like, yes, but I also see it this way, and it's both equally right. Well, what do we have to do? We have to get guidance. And And a lot of times when it's so ambiguous, we don't even get a response from the government until months and months and months and months later. So I think I answered that.
Yeah,
Part. I told you, I get all excited. I gotta bring it back in.
I would just say I've never disagreed with Mehrnoush on anything, so I would never.
And we've been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned a little bit very quickly, we have seen certain compliance issues that arise more frequently for Iranian-Americans, and these include those relating to divesting Iranian assets and transferring funds from or to Iran. So, I wanted to see if you could outline for us some considerations for legally divesting from Iranian assets in compliance with U.S. law.
Sure. So first and foremost, it's important to remember that there's no banking relationship, and that's what complicates things. So while the government, through general licenses, such as the receipt of commercial, non-commercial personal remittances to and from Iran is permitted, the sale of property that a U.S. person acquired before they became a U.S. person, and what does that mean? It does not mean when you got your citizenship. It doesn't even mean when you got your legal permanent residency. U.S. person is defined as anyone also that's physically present in the United States. So even if you were physically here, waiting for your documents to come through and you acquired property, that could be problematic. The only time a U.S. person can divest from property in Iran that they acquired when they are a U.S. person is if it's through an inheritance. And I mean, this comes up all the time. So I, for the most part, have lived in the United States. And when I think of an inheritance, I think, God forbid, someone passes and then there's an inheritance. Apparently in the Iranian culture, no. Anything that's given to you at any point that would one day be considered an inheritance is an inheritance. I mean, literally when someone says, I have an inheritance, I say, well, and I'm sorry to ask, did someone die? No, they're still alive. Well, unfortunately, that's not considered an inheritance. So someone has to have passed away. After that person has passed away, then title is transferred to you. And we need to see proof of that. So we need to see a death certificate, we need to see that transfer. So let's say you check these boxes, and also remember, you can't own and maintain a bank account in Iran. So you have to have a representative, whether it's an attorney or a non-US person who is essentially going to be able to assist you with this transaction. Now we get to the good part. How do you send your money here? Can you go to Parsian Bank and directly wire it to Bank of America? No. Which was interesting because the first case I ever worked on in 2010, the prosecutor in that case in front of the appellate judge's panel said, well, they could have just gone to this bank and wired it to Bank of America. That's how limited people's knowledge of the extensiveness of the sanctions are, as even individuals that are working in the government and that should be aware of it, just to keep that in the back of your mind. So, the only way to actually be able to move money, now we also see movement through various digital currency, but for the most part it's through currency exchange brokers. And what is that? So a currency exchange broker is you have someone in Iran that goes and gives the Iranian currency to this broker, and then the broker coordinates and sends you your funds from what should be a third country bank. It should never come from inside the United States. Recently, a lot of things have come up. For example, apparently there are these Telegram channels that people are using to coordinate to do exchanges with people. So if I want to send money to Iran, I'm looking for someone on Telegram that wants to send money to the United States, and then we coordinate where I give them money and then they give my family money. That's not permitted. The government is very clear that these types of informal money transfers, otherwise known as the hawala, are not allowed. Money needs to come from a currency exchange broker, and it should be wired from a third country bank. What happens when your US bank sees this transaction? Well, all they see is, for example, $100,000 coming from a random bank account in Malaysia into my account. I mean, I wish, but into your account. Or $50,000 then coming from a random bank in the Emirates, again. And from a random entity, well, how are they supposed to know what's what? Legally, you are not required by the law to coordinate or submit anything to the banks. But of course, that's what we've been doing over the years. So we vet the transactions, make sure they're permitted, and then we notify the bank by submitting compliance documents, legal memorandum, and affidavit to that department prior to each incoming wire so that they understand where the money is coming from, why the source of funds is permitted, and why they can clear it. And that was working really well until about last year, where US banks started, under the guise of de-risking, blanket closing Iranian accounts for various reasons. And that one hit me hard, because here you are, you have a community that is jumping through all these hoops, that are paying all these legal fees, which I also appreciate, and they're receiving money, and then they're having their bank accounts closed, not just that account into which funds were sent, every account that's associated with it, a business account, this account, that account. And so we actually, Bloomberg did an article on this recently, and that has led to a lot of attention coming from various government agencies and congressional offices. I was very proud of our community. We did a petition where we're asking Treasury to address these banking matters. And for our community, about almost 800 people signed it. That was pretty great. People are now talking about this. But the core of the problem is you need to communicate with your bank, and even if you do, you need to understand that there is a risk of bank account closures. I'm hoping that with working with the bank and the government is going to bring a little bit of clarity to this. One issue I do want to address is, recently it's been brought to my attention that the US banks are asking clients to sign 2 documents. One is an Iran declaration. So when you're opening up your account, they're asking you to sign a declaration that basically asks you, if you're Iranian, what your ties are to the government, and basically attesting that you have no ties to the government or any designated entities, you don't conduct business, and that you'll inform the bank of whatever type of remittances you're going to receive or any type of activities, which is very off-putting for someone to receive. But I actually think it's moving in the direction of they want to get more information from their customers to maybe, and this is my personal opinion, to then maybe not have to close it. A second one, which has very recently been sent, is the Iran travel questionnaire, where they're asking clients or their customers, if you plan on visiting Iran for more than 6 consecutive months, you need to tell us. And the reason for that is that even if you are a US person, if you're living in Iran, which they're using the 6 consecutive months as the way of testing that, a US depository institution or bank cannot export services to someone who is ordinarily resident of Iran. It doesn't matter what your background is. And I believe they probably, I don't know, I haven't seen how far it's gone, because this is literally letters that were sent out 2 weeks ago. But they want to know who's traveling there and who's staying there. But you should also keep in mind, even if you are staying in Iran for temporary purposes, never access online banking from Iran, because they can't export services to someone who's physically present in Iran, even if you're just visiting. And that leads to a lot of bank account closures, bank account restrictions, and so if you're traveling abroad and then your account is restricted or closed, it's a nightmare, because you can't really control any auto pays or anything that's going in and out of that account. So I know, see, I get
Very good.
But, so if you're receiving money from Iran, the number one important thing is make sure the source is legal, and then make sure that you are communicating with your bank. And if it requires a license, like what we discussed, if you were gifted property, it wasn't an inheritance, and you were a US person, you need to disclose it, and you need to file for a license.